if you are a single and you are thinking about marriage or beginning to get your mind wrapped around marriage, if you would go to our website and just search marriage decision making, there's going to be a series of things that pop up there. Documents that speak into how do I healthily think about marriage, reflection guides that encourage you just to think about some of the questions of growth, and excellent to walk through with an accountability partner, a mentor of some type.
Welcome, everyone, to Breaking Bread, the podcast brought to you by Apostolic Christian Counseling and Family Services. Wonderful, as always, to have you along. Kaleb, Beyer, and Arlan Miller are with me today. Welcome, both of you.
Good to be with you.
Thanks, Matt.
Our topic today is marriage, but actually kind of pre-marriage. We've got a lot of marital content out there, and it's very well received, too. Our listenership, you can tell by the numbers, has a high view of marriage, and I think is really exciting, right? Really equipping themselves in the way of skills and learning about marriage and how to do marriage well. But I've heard both of you talk on a number of different platforms about this pre-marriage preparation, maybe to label it, for lack of a better term, pre-marriage preparation, both pre-engagement as well as including the engagement phase prior to marriage, and how important these phases are. And I think it's a really, really healthy spot to get into. And Arlan and Kaleb, you both have worked closely on resources and providing resources to our church. Arlan, you can kind of speak to some of that. And so I invite you to bring those pieces in. And Kaleb, certainly as a marriage and family therapist, you have your ear to the ground as it concerns marriage. And a lot of what you listen for and hear gives you a wisdom to say, pre-marriage, this is what needs to take place. And I know you do walk with engaged couples as well. So just really look forward to filling out this space and providing a wonderful resource as we think about, as important marriage is, it all starts with a pre-marriage concept, doesn't it? Right? So with that set up, let's launch into that. Kaleb, let's start with you a little bit. You no doubt have thought about those benchmarks in terms of the journey into marriage. Maybe sketch some of those out, and then let's elaborate.
Yeah, so we would begin with their own walk with the Lord and the relationship with the Lord. And it is a phase that takes a lot of consideration and reflection of, how am I doing, and engaging also people around the individual. And so there's the spiritual walk, but there's also, just as you think about it, the marriage relationship is an intimate relationship. And so we can begin with that, and that is, how are the relationships in this individual's life, right? How are they relating to individuals of the opposite sex, but also of the same sex, and just the way that they interact and walk through conflict and, handle and manage differences. And so I think there's a lot of just discipleship we use that happens even before we get into the piece of who is it in an individual's life during singleness.
Yeah. And I would imagine a lot of that insight has come from you working with marriages where things do go back to pre-marriage days. Am I right about that?
Yeah.
Is that part of the insight that you have?
Certainly. Yeah. Things that show up in the marriage relationship that were prior to the marriage relationship.
Some of the best medicine for marriage happens pre-marriage. And you even started at a person contemplating marriage. It actually happens before marriage contemplation, doesn't it? I mean, we're talking early here, aren't we?
Right. And Matt, as we started to think about how do we support the church and how do we build resources to encourage the church, well, we kept coming against this idea that we need to keep almost kind of back up the process, because we can quickly with, engagement or premarital think, okay, it starts with, okay, who is it? Or I'm thinking about marriage. But to realize that discipleship, like you said, Kaleb, it's a discipleship aspect of the church that if we can get the right vision, the right expectations, the right mindset to think about how do I even know who I am, where I'm growing, where I'm lacking, where I need to continue to step into things, that's going to lay a solid foundation to then begin to step into that intimacy growth that you talked about, Kaleb, again, of coming together as a couple.
So, Arlan, you really cast, I think, an interesting vision, one of a communal responsibility towards growing people in a way that they're going to be able to enter a healthy marriage. You've really laid some onus on the church to be able to do this, which I think we need to pause and kind of recognize, because sometimes that's not the air we breathe, and we think we're a little bit kind of self-selection. This is my deal to figure out.
It's a private thing that happens.
What does the role of community plays in this? So maybe let's press into that a little bit. What is that vision that the larger community, that is the church community, plays in good marriages?
Yeah. Well, one that comes to mind just immediately, it reminds me of we used to play a video at the marriage seminar of this, I don't know if she was 10, 12-year-old. She's in this video, she's in this like wedding dress in front of this mirror, imagining, herself getting married. And then she looks out the window and sees her parents engaging in a tender moment together. And so I say that, Matt, because in some sense in the community, there are representations of marriage happening that begin to form. Certainly fundamentally for each of us, when we think of marriage, we immediately go to our parents and how did they do marriage. But there's also a sense of our local community as we look at couples and the way that they're living life and walking in ministry together that has a direct impact.
So there's that modeling aspect, which is so powerful and so influential within our lives as we model off what we see. But then the other part of community, I think, is just this whole counsel aspect, that the counsel we receive, this is a matter of the heart. And it's a matter of two individuals walking through discernment and processing emotions and feelings in God's will. And that type of decision is there is health to doing that in community with the counsel of others. And so part of the heart of the resource creation was to provide tools that could support that mentorship, that counseling, that community support into this process at every stage.
It's almost like the fundamentals. I mean, I've got this conversation that I've had with my son about, hey, you need to read a lot so that when you take the exams, ACT, SAT, right? The best way to prepare for that, and it's so out of mind right now, right? Because those exams are not on his schedule, but they will be, right? And so it's almost like this pre-work, and that's really what you're calling to, even pre-contemplation of marriage, right? There are simply fundamentals of the human life, and in more particular, the Christian life, that makes a person suitable for marriage and ready for that step. And to wait for that step in order to do your reading.
We don't cram for this test, right? We don't cram for this test.
But perhaps we kind of do that, maybe? Marital-wise.
When we don't look, I think that's the piece that's driving part of this. That's the point of it, because so often we can view it as, this individual is engaged and married, but there's a whole lot of life and counseling and that happens.
So let's press into some of the finer points. Okay, what would be some discipleship aspects? What would be some matters to press in if a person is pre-marital consideration, but just trying to grow as a human being in healthy ways that prepares them for whatever future, marriage in particular?
Yeah. So a couple comes to mind, and I think this is kind of really building off of what Arlan already said, and that is there's a healthy self-awareness that I think is good to have. And there are circumstances, situations that come up in the marriage relationship that is more about my response to my wife than it is about my wife. So I think with that, a identity that's grounded and rooted in Christ, that has a healthy sense of humility of where my areas of, you call them blind spots, Arlan, those areas that just we have tender spots or we have areas that we miss. And knowing that going into marriage is so healthy, because if not, the sense is easy to put it on the marriage relationship or on the spouse. Whereas, no, this is something that I bring, and your spouse knowing that is actually really helpful and goes a long ways in working through conflict and differences in a healthy way. So that's one, I guess, small example.
And I think there's another piece that goes into that, and you see this again in some of those resources. What is a healthy understanding of marriage? Again, we often can pattern it off what we have seen modeled, which can be very good, but also could have some areas that need to be shaped a little bit scripturally to say, am I viewing marriage properly? Or am I viewing it as like something that's going to solve all of my problems? Regardless of the cost on another person, this is going to fix me. Or how do I approach such a big, weighty decision? And how do I even, step into that in faith with godly counsel and biblical wisdom? Those kind of things are going to start to kind of rise to the top. Self-reflection, but also like, what is my expectation for what marriage is?
Expectations are huge. They've come across this podcast in so many different conversations and settings. What your expectations are and what reality is, the gap between that is a great deal of heartburn. So I want to go to Kaleb. What expectations have you seen? Perhaps people pursuing marriage, they have this idea of marriage and, well, it's not. I'm curious what some of those teaching points would be. What expectations are we kind of missing or in error about?
Yeah, so they can certainly vary. I mean, it used to be that, kind of the Cinderella story, right? Happily ever after, that, you get married and that all the kind of bad things in your life now all of a sudden become good. I don't think that's so much there, even though I would say that I think for all of us, I think this is true. There's this hope out there that things will change for the good, and that somehow this transition will lead to even areas that I may struggle in becoming better. And actually, we would say that's not completely accurate. In time, you have a helpmeet to support you, but actually sometimes it exposes things in a way that leads to initially more conflict or distress on a path of, moving towards things getting better. So, the kind of the Cinderella story, one of the things that happens during oftentimes, engagement or that stage of moving into marriage is, so it goes to idealizing it, right? Idealizing it in a way that then creates something that isn't real. We can overemphasize the blessing of it and minimize the messiness of it. And the reality that, guess what? This is two sinners in a relationship. And if you expect that things are going to go well all the time, you're missing the boat. That's not a healthy view of the marriage relationship. And I would say, I love Ange. We have a wonderful marriage, but there's also challenges, just like with any relationship. And so I think a healthy view of that.
And to be able to put that into a place of, this is a sanctification opportunity, right? That's going to grow me in my relationship with Christ and with another person. Like you said, Kaleb, in a very intimate relationship that's going to really shine the light on who we are and give us that opportunity of growth.
Yeah. How do we get a healthy expectation of marriage?
So a couple things. That's an interesting question, Matt. So two things come to mind. One is, I think we have to accept that we all have unrealistic expectations that will be exposed in the process of time in the relationship. So I put that out there because the goal isn't to eliminate all unrealistic expectations, but because we've never walked that path before. And so in a sense, I think the process of the marriage relationship exposes and brings those things out. But the other thing I think is, we talked about community, is I think about bringing couples, like if there are healthy, as I think about, I'm sure in your life, you could name couples that come to mind that you could sit down with, even in your single life. I mean, there are people, involved in the youth group that, and I know you are, Arlan, and so they're able to sit down with couples, and there's an authenticity to both the beauty but also the challenges in appropriate ways that I think helps create a more realistic picture of the marriage relationship. And there's a level of vulnerability that takes for couples to step into that place, I think. And I think that helps also, because you have a reality testing, right, with a couple who's walking through life.
But I think in that too, you can see a sweetness of that intimacy lived out over time, and the beauty of God working in a couple and through the thick and the thin. And if you open yourself up to that learning process, it starts to give, I think, a beautiful vision.
No, I really appreciate that. And okay, if I could even push a little bit further, Kaleb, what would be some specific things? Like, here's an area where there are unrealistic expectations that seem to swirl. You don't need to fix them all on this podcast, but if you were to give us some domains, like here is one, here is another, here's a third, I'm curious what you would say those were.
It's a good question. So, Matt, yeah, there's a few areas that come to mind. Certainly the area we've kind of talked about already is the area of gender differences, but also specifically roles in the marriage relationship. One of the things that we often talk about is like, okay, what responsibilities does the husband do? And there's a exercise we have premarital couples actually engage in, and it's interesting because oftentimes our expectation for what we will do or what our spouse will do is based on what our parents did. Oh, did dad take out the trash or did mom? What about the dishes? And we just bring that in to the marriage relationship with the expectation of that's just norm. Well, it might be norm for you, but it doesn't mean it's norm for your spouse. So that's one area. Also, the area of just intimacy. Both, we would say intimacy is a big category, whether that's sexual intimacy, emotional intimacy, or just how to engage and have fun together can look very different for individuals. But all of us have expectations in those areas, and we bring those certainly to the marriage relationship. And so I think that's another area. And then the piece of leaving and cleaving. You think about that. You talk about a complex transition happening from an individual who's in a family system, now all of a sudden leaving, not separating in the sense of disconnecting, but leaving and cleaving to the spouse. And you have all these relationships happening. And this family over here is different than this family over here, and they have certain expectations for what this relationship should look like. Plus, the couple themselves have expectations for what it should look like and how much time we should spend with each family, right? So there's a lot of processing that is happening in that transition. And it's really amazing, Matt, as I'm talking about this, that it goes as well as it does oftentimes.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is.
Generations ago, when Katie and I were premarital and engaged, I remember we did premarital counseling, and the counselor said there will be 3 areas that you'll have conflict about. You'll have conflict over holidays, which kind of speaks to that leaving and cleaving expectations. You'll have conflict over money, and you'll have conflict over sex. Because those are areas that you just, I think, naturally come into, just like you highlighted, Kaleb, with thoughts in your head. And part of the beauty of marriage is to work that together as a team and have those expectations brought together into a whole.
Well, all the more reason to complement what's already been said in terms of a community and seeing the church as stewarding this process for many, because we come to, are those expectations by way of some place in some way. And it's the air we breathe in our culture, right? It's the social media feeds. It's the entertainment we're taking in. They are all saying something about how sex works and how you're connected and the purposes for marriage and self-actualization and all of these things, right? I mean, and so there is a full court press required in order to have a healthy view of marriage. And that's what I hear you guys are really passionate about.
And I think one of the opportunities during that premarital time, in that engaged stage or engaged phase of marriage, is to create opportunities, and the resources try to do this, where couples can begin to talk about these things together, begin to have conversations. What are some questions to ask each other? What are some words to put, some terminology, some definitions, just so you can begin to see how these emerge, because they emerge And can we help put language to what I'm experiencing or what I'm feeling as I go to another level of closeness, of intimacy with my spouse or my fiance?
So I see that transition. We've been talking about pre-contemplation of the who, and then to this engaged. And so let's go there. Let's go to the engaged place where now all of a sudden we have dialogue. And dialogue, it becomes important. Or this communication now becomes important, which might be maybe a stress point, right?
Yeah. Yep. And even, with that, where my mind goes, just as he was talking about encouraging the couples to have conversation, communication together, engagement is a busy time oftentimes. And there's a lot of great things happening related to showers and weddings and, bachelorette, all of these stuff. But I think prioritizing actually their relationship over the event.
So we can take our eyes off the ball.
I think so. I think so. Because you're cultivating, back to the long view of a journey, this is about cultivating a relationship.
Well, even more important than that we do the pre-work, right?
Right.
If we wait for engagement to do the work of marriage preparation, we may be behind the curve.
Right. Think about the whole journey as a foundation setting. And you're never going to know what you know 5 years into marriage or whatever. We're not pretending that you can have that kind of premonition. But can you set foundational principles of first knowing ourselves well and growing, and then being able to talk together and build healthy communication patterns, conflict resolution patterns, being able to step into conversations and turn towards each other to talk through these things? If you can't do that in an engaged phase, when the emotions are often high and kind of sometimes, infatuation in there and those kind of things, it's going to be harder to do it, 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road when life is just throwing other curveballs at you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. What's some of the most common advice you give an engaged couple, Kaleb? What do you find yourself going back to over and over again? Remember this.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that actually the parents talk a little bit about this is choosing your ruts wisely. And that is kind of developing early on what sort of the, people call them rituals or disciplines or kind of this structure of some sort that helps you stay connected through life and being intentional about developing those early on. Because if you wait for that, what life brings at you, whether it's
so you see connection very central.
Yes.
To moving into a healthy marriage.
Yeah.
Connection. Okay. Yes. And what might some engaged couples miss in terms of connection? Because they're like, what do you mean? We're crazy about each other. All right. So
check box. That's a connection.
Check box, connection done. But you might say, wait. Don't hang on here.
Yeah.
So
yes. So that's a good question, Matt. You're really good at this. Just kind of the questions and just kind of unpacking.
I'll give you my secret. You want my secret? Just be stupid. So
that's comes pretty easy.
It comes really easy. And so then you just ask questions.
Yeah.
I'm so stupid, I forgot my question. Do you remember? Hopefully Kaleb remembers my question.
I remember your question.
Connection.
Yes, connection. What are the components? Yeah. So, I think part of this, it is, just as we're talking, we're connecting this together of self-awareness of, as we think about connection, we think about vulnerability and opening up, because the depth of our connection also is in relation to the level of my openness and vulnerability with another. Is we think about naked and unashamed, okay? That is the kind of place that we want to go. But I think for all of us, our worst fear is, okay.
To be seen and not loved?
Yes, to be seen and not loved. Or to be loved and really loved superficially, right? And so I think with that, the connection is, how do I expose vulnerabilities in a way that leads to deeper connection?
And so here's my aha here, Kaleb. Naked and unashamed certainly has a physical, sexual component to it. Mm-hmm. And we might just get off on the wrong foot by thinking the act of sex is the end of intimacy and all of intimacy. But the way I heard you explain it, No, it's not. In fact, it could pass for that and keep our eyes closed to all that needs to be seen. Am I right?
Yes. Yeah.
So good work in the engagement is intimate work.
Yes. Yeah. The ability to be able to bring up fears and to talk about those fears and to acknowledge them first myself, but also share them. And that's that can be tough work.
Mm-hmm. Depending upon what you've been modeled or what your experience is, what your level of self-awareness. And it's a process that takes time. And it is not just you're not going to flip a switch and do that. And everybody's a little bit different with it, but it's a process that takes time to step into that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the pieces of advice I find myself continually giving, or Katie and I find ourselves continually giving to others, is just that simple. I forget where we learned it from. Maybe it was you, Kaleb, but this idea of just always turn towards each other. Just always turn towards each other. Because there will be many times when what you want to do is just turn the other way or go in the other room or whatever. And I'm not saying you don't have times of cool down, but that discipline of turning towards each other is a connection point that is going to force you into dealing with some of these issues and grow in your vulnerability, your intimacy, your emotional awareness.
It's interesting too, Arlan, as you say that, and building the discipline of turning towards each other in the engagement phase, for example, because sometimes in the engagement phase, we give each other much more grace and we can get mileage out of not doing the fundamentals. Am I right?
Yes.
We got mileage without doing the fundamentals. The harm of that is we go into marriage thinking the fundamentals might not be as necessary as it's all cracked up to be, and we're in for a surprise. So you're saying build those fundamentals.
Build that foundation, build those fundamentals, because then that will continue to get you on the right ruts, as you said, and the right trajectory.
I like rhythms better than ruts.
Rhythms. Oh, yeah, I like that.
The right rhythms, and it'll get you on the right trajectory.
That has a better ring to it.
So, Arlan, in terms of resources here, we've talked about a lot. We've talked about equipping a church community to walk with people, right? To build in the soft skills that are going to be required, right? So I'm curious about resources either for singles or for engaged couples. What are some go-to places?
Sure. So, if you would look at our website or just kind of consider, if you are a single and you are thinking about marriage or beginning to get your mind wrapped around marriage, if you would go to our website and just search marriage decision making, there's going to be a series of things that pop up there. Documents that speak into how do I healthily think about marriage, reflection guides that encourage you just to think about some of the questions of growth, and excellent to walk through with an accountability partner, a mentor of some type. And, one of my favorites is just this idea of a balanced perspective when approaching marriage, because it helps you think through some of the extremes, because we can get these pictures of what marriage decision-making is supposed to look like or what it looks like to approach marriage. And sometimes they can shade a little bit towards like extreme views, and you find health and truth in the middle. And then to build upon that as an engaged couple, and even in those early years of marriage, we've housed most of our resources in one booklet called Growing a Strong Marriage. And you can find online versions on our website. You can look at the specific resources individually off our website. But again, if you would search that Growing a Strong Marriage, it's going to point you in that direction, filled with content, filled with discussion questions, filled again with resources that are going to encourage you to start those conversations, to turn towards each other and begin to build in that way.
That's great. Kaleb, as we think about the engaged couple, you work with a fair amount of engaged couple, some resources, maybe a favorite book to read or resources that you engage with them.
Yep. So one of the things that we find very helpful at some point during engagement is to have couples there's a couple assessment tools that we use, whether it's Prepare Enrich, and some churches are doing this already, whether it's through the elder or minister or a mentor couple, is they go through what's called Prepare Enrich. So the couple completes it, and then the mentor couple or elder couple walks through with the engaged couple, and it shows areas of strengths, growth areas, and just is a platform to engage in some really focused conversation around this couple, unique to them. So that's one of the things that we really, really encourage.
And that resource would really bring to the surface a lot of the content we've talked about today.
Yes, correct.
In a way that couple can walk through it in a really healthy way. Now, for our listeners who might not be one step tied to ACCFS, can they go and Google prepare? Is it called Prepare and Enrich? Can you find this assessment? Can anybody go out and take it? How does that work?
Yeah, good question. So you need a facilitator to actually take it, which both Ted and I are facilitators, and so we will,
Do you know if that website provides any of that for a person going on and saying, "Hey, I want to do this. I don't have a counselor. I don't have this contact, but I want to take this assessment with my fiance"?
So what you could do is they have a search for a facilitator, if you really wanted to step into this.
Okay.
And you would then find a facilitator in your area who you may know or not know.
Okay.
And if you're comfortable with that, you could certainly go down that path.
But it sounds like there is an on-ramp to this and via other paths beyond ACCFS.
Oh, yes, correct. And I know of at least a handful of ministers who are facilitators in local congregations that they take their engaged couples through this. So
we'll include in the show notes some of these links, some of these resources, links to the website, also to Prepare and Enrich. I think that sounds excellent. Thank you both for sharing that. I'm sure some are listening like, they dodged the who question. I did not intend to dodge that question.
Right. Yeah.
But actually, I'm going to leave it like that because it gets most of our angst and spins most of our wheels. And I don't mean to minimize it, but certainly we have a high respect for that juncture.
Yeah.
And there are resources out there as you engage in that discernment process with the Lord. But today was more about some of the things that often get overlooked because of that question. And so I think we'll leave it like that. Thanks, both of you. Thanks, each one, for listening. Really, really respect this area of marriage. We all view marriage so highly as a gift from God, but also a calling. And so we want to provide those resources. So I hope that this has been that for you. God bless you, each one.